We're talking about The Great Escape. Even though I'm sick, I like this movie enough that I'm like, I just want to talk about this movie.
This isn't a war movie.
Yeah, this is like based on a true story epic where the war happens to be the backdrop. We were calling it a reversed heist movie where it's the best of the best come together. It's kind of refreshing because it's in the 60s, so they're like, hey, this is based on real events. We condense the time, we condense some of the things, but like, this is legit.
It's very true to life.
That's an excellent way to put it. It is hard to explain how engaging it is.
It does not feel like 3 hours.
The plot of this movie is simple. They're trying to escape.
Juggling this huge cast of characters.
Yeah. This feels like the 1960s version of an MCU event where you have all of these hard-hitting players, great performances, great character work. I think that's what this movie succeeds at. Because there's so many characters, you just have to experience it. Watch the movie. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Narratives and Nonsense. We're friends talking about random and recent stories, newsworthy or otherwise. I'm Jordan.
I'm Connor.
I'm a little under the weather this week, so that's been fun. But we have all sorts of stuff. We're talking about the movie The Great Escape from 1963, and even though I'm sick, I like this movie enough that I'm like, damn it, I want to talk about it, so here we are. And then before that, we've got a little bit of news from this last week and then some random holidays for you and all that jazz. So, Connor, how was your week?
It was work and climbing and stuff.
Nice,
just
chill.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Yep. Living the dream.
Not too stressful or anything. How's Dark Souls been?
It is still
Fair enough. I'm in a similar boat. Lots of work. Been trying to get over this stupid thing. I think that it's just cold, but I don't know. I might be getting into fever territory. We're about to find out. It's not been enjoyable. I have a big headache. It's the worst. And then I think probably the most exciting thing on the work front is a mutual buddy, a friend of mine from high school. He's played D&D with. He got promoted at work, and he's going to be starting today, as of the release of the podcast, or this Monday, what have you. We record on the Sunday prior. So that was really exciting. I got to talk to him for a little bit last week about that whole transition and stuff. He's been at the same job for about 2 years, a little bit less than I have been, but super cool, very exciting. And then other things for like this week, it snowed a little bit. It might snow again. It looked like on the forecast. Yeah.
What I was hearing.
Yeah. Wednesday, more snow, some clouds, like 40s to 60s. It might hit 70 because, Colorado.
Yeah. Who knows?
It's all a mad dash, a mad gamble for figuring out the weather the day of.
Hopefully we should be on one of our last daylight saving cycles. So
yeah, theoretically. There's
crossed.
Yeah, so that's happened.
Do the right thing.
If you haven't set your clock back, now's the time. Not really a holiday, but adjacent enough. It's worth mentioning. Also, for fun Colorado folks, voting ends Tuesday. Yep. So get your votes in if you haven't. You can't mail them in anymore, but you can go in person or go to the drop boxes or what have you. They're all over the place. Get your voting in, be part of the democratic electoral process, blah, 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 all that jazz. So, for news things, some of the stuff is like wider ranging topics. So not just within like the scope of this last week, but things that we thought were kind of cool. One of them was that there's not been a lot of talk about the hole in the ozone layer. And that's for good reason, because we kind of nailed it. So, looking at the trend, it's something where the hole in the ozone layer has been shrinking. For those that are unaware, we first started really picking up that there was a problem in the 1980s. The ozone layer is kind of, it's really important and kind of responsible for why we don't just become irradiated masses on the planet from the sun's rays. Yeah, the ozone layer is kind of like a protective, insulative blanket around the globe. But in the 80s, we started to see a trend of it kind of falling apart. And the reason for that, or at least one of the primary ones, was CFCs. They're chlorofluorocarbons, or chlorine fluoride carbon.
That's what you get from burning lots of fuel.
Well, actually, it's not just that. So CFCs were used in a lot of different forms of manufacturing. It was kind of regarded as like a miracle molecule compound kind of thing. You could put it in just about anything. Initially, we thought that it was unreactive. However, the problem comes in when it goes up into the atmosphere. When it gets further enough up, it starts to degrade. And the chlorine part of it starts to break off and creates chlorine monoxide and just regular oxygen out of ozone, which is 3 oxygen molecules. And then you have this kind of cascading effect where that chlorine monoxide would then also break apart. So you have this one chlorine molecule just going up, like punching 8 guys in the face before it finally is dissipated and no longer in that level of the atmosphere. So that's kind of the issue with CFCs in particular. Now, that's not the only thing, but we saw that it was a big enough problem and it would have very long lasting consequences that everyone got their butt in gear. And by, I think it was 88, there was the Montreal Treaty for getting everybody to stop making CFCs, along with a lot of other ozone damaging compounds. And 90s and early 2000s, that started to really get implemented. And now it's something where the last 3 years, just going by like the data representation, it's starting to just look a lot better comparably. And we're on trend for, originally back in the 80s, they thought that we wouldn't have an ozone by 2050. Now we think that we're going to have the same ozone by 2050 that we had before the 1980s even happened. So huge reversal. The thing that's also kind of nice with it is that, while we kind of ended up replacing CFCs with HFCs, which come with their own problems. They're not damaging the ozone, but they are very big time like greenhouse gas problems. It's still problematic for the environment. We are starting to see the same kind of push against HFCs that we saw against CFCs back in the day. So we can fix stuff, and that's kind of cool. But yeah, ozone. We're working on it. Kapow. Another thing that's kind of cool as far as like fixing things up is down in the Amazon, in Peru in particular, there were over 6,000 turtles that were reintroduced into the wild. It was 3 different species of turtle. They did this to spite Michael Reeves, who is notorious for his turtle hate.
To be fair, are these all sea turtles though?
Amazon beaches, I don't
he does
think they are all
specifically
sea
hate
turtles.
the sea turtles, so
I thought it was all turtles.
no, sea turtles. 'Cause those are the ones that are at the highest risk of getting straws in their noses from Michael Reeves throwing them into the ocean.
He has a whole rant about straws. It's fantastic. So with the 6,000, it was over specifically 6,100, 3 different species. What they did was they went to the different beaches, gathered a whole bunch of turtle eggs, and then went to an artificial, or they had their own little basin, artificial base, beach, that they incubated the eggs over 60 days, before putting them back into the wild. And a huge part of that is just to help with repopulation efforts. I imagine that the ecosystem as a whole will very much enjoy having turtles, even if it's not just cool, now we have more turtles, but it's also anything that would have eaten turtles, things that the turtles would eat, that kind of thing.
It's the whole ecosystem.
Yeah. So that was a big thing. Another thing that's kind of cool as far as like fixing up things that already exist or like pushing it more so, what have you, is Over in Switzerland, they have been playing around with solar paneled windows or transparent solar panels. There's a lot of different ways to kind of phrase it, but that's its best application, is putting it into windows. Back in 2012, they started to install them in the Swiss Tech Convention Center down there. In 2011, they had them in the Copenhagen International School. For the international school, it's something where they have like a blue dye added to it, and it by itself accounts for like half of the annual electricity needs of the school. It's over 300 megawatt hours of power that it's providing. More recently, the reason like it popped into the news, from what we saw, is that the technology behind it had a little bit more of a breakthrough. So before, it's something where it's like, okay, that's neat. You can get like some power from transparent window type stuff, but it's nowhere near as good as just having a legit solar panel. With the recent developments, it's something where they're getting about 15% efficiency in direct sunlight and 30% in ambient light, which doesn't sound great. However, compared to most commercially available solar panels, commercially available ones are at about 20% efficiency. So they're almost 1-for-1.
It's also a lot of surface area depending on the building.
Oh, yeah. No, and one of the biggest pitches is if it's something where you can put these onto skyscrapers, as an example, you basically have vertical solar farms that can just gather energy throughout the day and even potentially recapture energy at night when, you have lights on throughout the house and what have you, and the street lights, et cetera, et cetera. That's something where they were thinking that between that and rooftop solar panels, you could, with good storage management and efficiency and et cetera, you could potentially power the entirety of the United States simply with these kinds of transparent windows and some rooftops. Like, it's pretty fascinating. One of the articles we were going to talk about, but decided to elect against, is the UK is starting to set some renewable energy records. And a good chunk of that was from wind, but there's also a large chunk that's coming from solar as well. That's something where we're just continuing to see that trend of renewable stuff, and going back to like the ozone layer and things like climate change, where we're starting to get our gear in line, or get our butt in gear, whatever, to really make those differences. It's really fascinating to see us kind of continue the upward trends. So I'm very happy with that kind of stuff. And like, dude, it just sounds sci-fi. Solar power windows just by itself as a line is really cool. Going from that to another thing, when it comes to pharmaceuticals and drugs and so on and so forth, it's something that usually it's not as straightforward as one drug treats one thing. I think Advil, ibuprofen, what have you, is a great example. It's pain relief and fever reducer. Like, it has a multi-purpose function, so you can use it for one thing or you can use it for another thing. One of the things that scientists have been testing and researching is there was a drug that is kind of mid-development and testing for type 2 diabetes. Well, let me read the name. Semaglutide sounds right.
Semaglutide.
C. So semaglutide is developed for treating and helping with type 2 diabetes, but with a bunch of different trials that they've been having, they're starting to find that it might actually be good for just overall weight loss as well. So in one of their more recent tests, they had 133. They're looking in particularly at helping younger kids, teens, etc. In the test that they did, it was people from 12 to 17 years old. There were 133 of them that were tested and treated with the drug. And then there were 67 that had a placebo. And in the midst of this testing, it was a double-blind test, and them and the parents would be like taught about just vaguely important nutritional and dietary and exercise kind of information. You know, here are things for like healthy living. For the 133 that were being treated with the drug, as well as going through the whole talk shebang, it was something where about of the 133, there was about a 15% weight loss on average for each of the for the kids. And granted, like some of them lost, you know, like 5%, some of them lost 20%. On average, it was about 15. And then that accounted for about 34 pounds of weight that they ended up losing. While for the placebo, the 67, where they didn't actually give them the drug for treatment, they ended up gaining weight of about 5 pounds, you know, a couple of percent, what have you. So it's looking promising as a way to help with treating obesity. Now, it is worth noting that in the weeks after this whole test, they kept an eye on them and were still studying, and it did look like some people were putting that weight back on afterwards. So this might be a tool to help with it. And that's something that's going to need a little bit more research, but dude, weight loss drug, that'd be kind of cool.
And always, diet and exercise is always good for you.
Always helpful.
Even me.
Yeah. And,
helps with all kinds of great things.
Yeah. And, the best part of this is that whenever we
can say proper eating, you're not dieting. Everybody doesn't need to diet.
Yeah. But in this case, it's something where, in terms of like drug trials and stuff, the fact that we've found another use on top of its original intent, that's always a good thing, because the more uses it has, the more likely we're going to continue producing it, makes it more cost available.
Pick it up.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not just selling it to one demographic of people.
Yeah. So, that's something that was pretty cool. And then, on the, I was about to say other side of the world, further south, another thing that's just kind of like neat, wholesome, what have you. Over the last couple of years, Mrs. Puerto Rico and Argentina had apparently been having a relationship that they kept very private. Both of them were in the top 10 for Miss International in 2020. That's how they ended up meeting, according to the person that won that year.
Yeah.
And then, after meeting, you know, they kept it quiet and whatnot. And just this last week, they announced that they were officially married as of the 28th. They made the announcement on the 29th on Instagram. Lots of cute photos and video clips and what have yous and stuff like that. So that was kind of neat. It was just cool. Absolutely. I liked it. Yeah, like, good on them. And then finally, probably one of the more like wholesome long form things. So the song Runaway Train, which came out, you know, decades ago. It's an old song, but Soul Asylum. It's just a good song. And, it was something where they were trying to come up with like what kind of music video, and the guy that ended up like putting together the video went, oh my gosh, you know what? He ended up seeing a advert for, you know, missing persons thing, and went, that's what we should do. So the music video ended up becoming kind of a mix of more traditional, I was going to say grungy, like that's kind of the look of it. Yeah. But it's intercut with legitimate photos and names of peoples that have gone missing. And out of the music video, they ended up doing 3 different versions in the US and then 1 version in the UK. For the US folks specifically, if I'm right, the number of total people shown was 36. And as time has gone along, even so far as, I think the latest information was for 2021, just this last year, they've found 21 people. technically they've found more than that. However,
perspired.
Yeah, not all of it's a happy ending. For instance, there were 2 people that were found in 2007.
Yeah.
That had unfortunately passed away, and the killer was like put behind bars. But it's something where the kind of longevity of it is really impressive, and the fact that they did make a difference with it. One of the things that they originally were given a little bit of pushback on was when the music video aired on MTV, the record label, initially they were pretty gung-ho about it because they were like, wow, yeah, that's cool, that's awesome, it might make a difference, that kind of thing. When it made it onto MTV, they ended up pushing back and saying, hey, you know, it's been a minute, no one's been found. Do we want to just replace it with the band folks, and just have them and, you know, just make it a more traditional music video? And they're like, no, keep it up. Keep it waiting. And then as some folks were found, that's why there's multiple versions in the US, is they replaced them as they went along. So yeah, super cool thing. The honestly,
actual power of music.
Yeah. And, to me, it's something where, you know, this is pretty revolutionary for back then, but it's still like incredibly effective to this day, because it's not something that everybody does. I think the best example I can think of is in 2017, Logic has the suicide hotline song, the 1-800-273-8255 song. And with that, it was able to, like, it had a massive uptick for people visiting the suicide hotline website. Like in the hundreds of thousands of people were looking. They looking into that stuff, just researching and seeing how that went. It was something like between 20 and 30% call increase. They think, because it's a little bit harder for saying how directly suicide prevention happens, because they don't kill themselves, so it doesn't become a statistic as easily translatably. But they think that, you know, just by estimates, it's between 200 to 300 people ended up not committing suicide because they got in touch with the hotline. So it's something where music has a very potent effect, and it's really cool to kind of see like some of, I would say, like pioneers of that back in the day versus, you know, something that you would see now. And hopefully we continue to see that, because
it's always nice to see popular artists using their platform to present something other than themselves. Yeah, exactly. Especially in such a meaningful way.
Yeah. So that's the good news articles, things that we were talking about. For holidays, just on the topic of music and other recreational activities that you may pursue and whatnot, it is Recreation Day in Tasmania, northern Tasmania in Australia. Similarly, for holiday things, it is All Saints Day down in Colombia for Christians celebrating down there. It's kind of a little bit of blended with like Dia de los Muertos, just a little bit as far as the festivities themselves.
Time to celebrate, remember their fallen family members and such.
Yeah, it is Color the World Orange Day, which that in particular is kind of like with cancer awareness. It is a awareness day for complex regional pain syndrome, which is also classified as reflex sympathetic dystrophy. It's one of those like rare illnesses that we don't have a lot of understanding of, but it's painful. It's something where we think that the nerves kind of like bundle or misfire. So it could be something where you start triggering like an immune response for some kind of injury related problem. And Color the World Orange Day is kind of meant for bringing both awareness to that, since awareness, you know, acknowledging there's an issue is the first step in solving it.
Instead of people just silently sitting around and suffering it.
Exactly. And then for those that are suffering, it's also meant to better educate those folks and the folks around them that while it is a rarer condition that's, you know, that is out there, there are ways of kind of lessening symptoms, whether it's physical therapy or psychotherapy, whatever drug treatments, so on and so forth. So it is something that we can help manage a little bit. So a little more awareness on that front. It is also Retinol Day for all you skincare folks out there. And then Hug a Bear Day, not to be mistaken with a grizzly. It is a teddy bear. Let's just acknowledge that. Safety Stuff warning. Kind. Hug your Pooh Bear, not...
And to be honest, Hug a Bear Day, maybe not the most solid name, but I like it.
The idea is cute.
Hug your stuffed special friend.
Yeah. Or if you, are in such a privileged or cool position that you have a bear trainer that knows that their bear is huggable and nice, but that is extraordinarily rare and altered circumstance. Otherwise, make sure it's a stuffed bear.
Well, I am currently quite stuffed. I had a nice dinner with my grandparents. So.
And then the final one. Oh, yay.
Okay.
I'm not a bear. I feel
I'm stuffed.
I feel like I'm going into a hibernation. I'll tell you what. And then the final one is so specific. Bittersweet Chocolate with Almonds Day. And that title is just delightful.
I like all those things.
Right.
Put that in my mouth.
It's not just chocolate. It's bittersweet chocolate. It's not just bittersweet chocolate. It's with almonds. But what's funny is bittersweet chocolate with almonds day also isn't necessarily specific to dark chocolate. You could have a milk chocolate that is just more on the bittersweet side. There's a lot of weirdness in it. I love it. So, from that chocolate bar to maybe smuggling a chocolate bar into a war camp in World War II, we're talking about The Great Escape. Boy, howdy, I love this movie. It's So it came out in 1963.
Starts the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Steve McQueen.
There's all sorts of just the acting in this movie on the whole.
You got Donald Pleasance in there, it's just ridiculous.
Everybody comes out swinging with great performances, great character work, great arcs for their individual characters. I feel like this is a movie. It's based on a book and true story where you had, these prisoners of war in World War II in Nazi Germany, from all over the world. You have, folks from Australia and Poland and, the US, the UK, so on and so forth that end up, you almost get this kind of we were calling it a reversed heist movie where it's the best of the best come together.
Well, and the interesting thing is this prison existed for specific POWs that had tried to escape.
Yeah.
This was a max security POW.
Yeah.
Camp.
And,
2,000 airmen or so in there.
Yeah. So, with this movie, it's something where it manages to feel epic and involved and immersive and engaging the whole way through without falling to what I would say a more modern version might go into more of a biopic view of it. So this still manages to stay very exciting, and they put it ahead. It's kind of refreshing because it's in the 60s. So they're hey, this is based on real events. We condensed the time, we condensed some of the things, but the things happened. This is legit.
Yeah, this is not inspired by a true story. I'm sure certain parts, I'm not going to sit here and say it's entirely historically accurate and everybody here, but it's very true to life, I guess.
Yeah.
Put it.
Yeah, that's an excellent way to put it. True to life. Yeah, it's very fun. So filmmaking wise, it's something where I think in some places it definitely shows its age. I think music to me is one of those things just because, and we have a little bit mixed feelings about the music because I think it felt a little bit samey, repetitive, but music big orchestral scores, that's not something that happened until quite some time after the fact.
Yeah.
But you really enjoyed the music for...
I mean, it's one of those things I don't disagree with you, but I think you can choose to not use a technique in a way to say something. You as an artist can choose to use a certain medium, not use a brush, not use a color. So I do think it was intentional. Like, yes, I don't think it follows the standard Hollywood format of big orchestral OST, but I think that was intentional.
Yeah. For me, and this might just be, I'm not as familiar with movies dating back as far as that. Like, to me, I feel like music in movies, you know, going back to 40s through 60s, it's something that accompanies, and for like the rare occasion, it'll have like a swell here or there, unless it's like a musical outright, in which case that's the focus. And I felt like it's more when you get to like
Dracula, then probably like Dracula more.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it's something where that's a lot more built into like the genre that it is. And I feel like with almost every movie today, you almost can't get away with having a samey track. I don't know if that's the right way to phrase it.
I don't know. Star Wars has been getting away with it for a long time.
Don't you dare. Don't you dare.
Oh, I'm daring.
Yeah, no. Andor is awesome. Mandalorian is refreshing. No, you shut your trap.
We're just going to ignore the 9 movies. It all has accident.
There's so much good stuff in that.
I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying they really rest on that laurel. Like,
so...
Either way. Okay.
Nope. Soapboxing. We're here. All right. So the music in Star Wars, a lot of it is leitmotif.
It's great.
It's not the same track. And I feel like in this movie, it's not just a leitmotif.
I'm not comparing it to this movie. I'm just saying that.
I feel like music becomes much more important in, say, the 70s, 80s range, which would make sense. That's when Star Wars came out.
You're getting at this, but like, you know, in the era of silent films, that's all there was music.
Yeah, because that's all there was.
Yeah.
It's just, I feel like there's this small era that the music is there to make sure there's not silence. Maybe is the way I'd put it. And I feel like in this, it's not used to create emotions. I do agree in that they rely on other techniques to do that, and I think they very much succeed in that. But I love, and this might also be because I'm a dancer, I love music and paying attention and hearing and understanding what thoughts and conventions are being used in music. So something like Star Wars, where you have leitmotifs, this equals Empire, as an example. It's not just we only play the Imperial March. In fact, it's not even in Episode 4 at all. But you still have the pieces of it in terms of the horns and the notes and whatnot that carry through to different parts of the series as a whole. This is Jordan also going to concede that I do not think the music in the sequel trilogy is nearly as good, because while it uses pieces of it, it doesn't lean into the leitmotif nearly as much in that sense.
Okay. Anyway, past Star Wars.
Yeah, we got to move away from Star Wars.
Lighting guy, though, the absence of light is just as important as the actual light. Yeah. Like, it's like a rest in music.
Sure.
The absence of sound is there too. So, and I think that's, I think that's what they're going for here. Like, I don't think it's impossible for them to get music in this. They chose not to use it to kind of underscore that. Well, it's like, look at the descent. Very little light in that entire movie. You can't even see half the scenes. That was intentional.
Yeah, I don't know if it's completely intentional with this movie. It might actually, you know, what might be a big chunk of it is because it is more real life-y, that they don't use a lot of music. However, the music that is used sounds almost always like it's the same upbeat kind of track thing. And that's something where, to me, I feel like some of the uses of the music could have been more in sync with what's happening in the scene.
I would say it's generally the main theme. I would say it was more like bombastic and heroic.
Sure.
That's what I would say.
Sure.
It's not
but
like,
you can have different flavors of the same theme.
Yep.
Let's use the Force theme. The Force theme, when it's first introduced, Luke looking at the sunset, is very like depressive, longing, that kind of thing. But then as it goes throughout the series, you get to see it used again in a heroic sense, again in a like, when it was played for like Vader's funeral as an example, like that's something where it's depressive in that moment rather than just I want more. Like, that's something where you can have that same piece, that same theme, and reorchestrate it in different ways. I don't feel like they did that in this movie. That's not to say this movie is bad, because it's absolutely not. I think that this is it showing its age, because it's it's early 60s, and it's a 3-hour film with so much power behind it that I think that it became part that I do genuinely think it's a convention of the time. It just was not something that mattered as much. If this were something that were remade a decade or two later, the music would have a much different tonal language. That's kind of my feeling with it.
And that was a really long way to say you're wrong, but
fight me.
I will.
I don't care if I'm sick. I'll go for your throat. So
anyways, past our grievances.
Yeah. So cinematography, I think I felt like it's very traditional for the mass majority. Again, this is, to me, I feel like this movie is an epic in that there is a lot to it. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of moving pieces. So they had to just kind of churn through to make sure that everything is understood correctly by the audience. So most of the cinematography I felt like is perfectly, in tune, serviceable. Nothing like too out there.
We're really on the, because I'm out on the other side of I think it is specifically done that way as a show of it is always, because this movie's about a collective.
Yeah.
There are very few, panning close-ups or shutter shots to other characters. It is shot in a medium, much like this shot now, that we have.
We have a static view.
But I think that iterates the importance of the collective of the people here.
So I don't think that there are too many moments where the cinematography is directly influential of the emotion of the story or the tension. I think a lot of it comes down to the edit and the plot rather than the camera work. I think the best use of the camera work, and this might also be more about the stage in which they filmed it and the how they filmed it, would be for all of the tunnel stuff. Because I think the tunnel stuff is the cinematic standout of the film. We do have a plane thing later on, but that just felt like any old plane shot in a movie where you have, all right, here's actual plane filming actual plane, and then the actors in green set. Blue screen set.
Well, or that wasn't even it. Yeah, that was just,
it wouldn't even be projecting that
footage.
That to me was stock standard for what existed at the time. But I think the tunnel scene, to me, or scenes plural, because there's a bunch.
Yeah.
It's a great escape. There's a tunnel. So with the tunneling stuff, that's something where it is made to feel a lot more cramped, a lot more constrictive, and you only ever really see one angle. And I think that, to me, was the most deliberate camera work of this entire movie. And I really liked that they maintained that consistency through the vast majority until some shenanigans happens later. We'll talk about that later because it's spoilers.
That's what I think of the wide shots as well. Is it's that same idea of like, that's one reason I really like the tunneling scenes, is because I do think they break it up really nicely and make you feel that. But I think those wide shots are very good for getting to the immersion point of you being in that crowd, standing next to these guys with everybody around. And that's why they continue that consistency.
So yeah, cinematography, it does its job.
Amazingly well. It's
the acting, and I can't gush enough about the acting, because I do think that this movie absolutely falls apart if the actors weren't crushing it at every angle, because it's very different characters, very unique characters. If it was something where they were forgettable in their performance, then it would so easily get lost in the grand scope. I mean, this movie is 3 hours, and kind of like with Rogue One, it's like you start to forget the names of people because there's so much shuffling between them. But they absolutely stand out in their own right. You remember what the character and their traits are and how they act and why they are doing what they're doing and their own little personal arcs. And I think that's honestly one of the biggest successes of this film is
juggling this huge cast of characters.
Yeah. And in some ways, I mean, this feels like the 1960s version of an MCU event where you have all of these hard-hitting players that are coming from all walks of life, very character focused. You have lots of fun interactions and collaborations happening between each of them against, insert wider threat. And that's something that I think is really kind of exciting to see if that, and kind of ponder, is this something that has directly inspired things that have come after it? We called it a reverse heist. I would say that Avengers Endgame is outright a heist event movie where you have all these characters on their own sub arcs. I could very easily see just like 2 or 3 of these characters in The Great Escape having their own like movie prior to, if this were recreated in the modern era where we like to have multiple movies. It was very refreshing in that sense that, just as far as expectations for an old movie and what you actually get, nothing is ever original. There's always going to be influences from all over the place. It's something
it's based off a book.
Yeah. And, for like my own kind of input and thought and take on it, the reason that I had watched this movie is I was running a D&D session for the very first adventure of your guys' current campaign in the Star Wars setting, where you guys are breaking out of a prison. So I watched The Great Escape, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. We were
just as clever and crafty as these guys about it.
They lied to the guards, said it was a book club. They murdered one and shoved him into a locker.
Lit some stuff on fire.
They thought that they were going to break out of the pipes. They ended up just stealing a ship.
I think Jordan thought we were going to break out. That was never...
You guys talked about the pipe river, like, analogy, like, oh, on chapter 12, the river bends to the left and goes down a waterfall. And I was like, okay, yeah, they're going to... All right, cool. And after the fact, like you and I think it was, or not you, it was Robbie and a couple other people were talking like, okay, so like the waterfall in the river, that's the pipe, right? Yeah, it's the pipe.
I think the thing was like, as I think about it, like, I think we were going to do that, but then we were trying to do something and it escalated and we were like, we've been had.
Maybe a great way to put it is how your session ended up playing out. Slight spoilers. They had all of this planned for getting out.
Slight spoilers. Everybody's seen our campaign.
No, not for the campaign, for this movie. Slight spoilers for this movie. They have, set goals, plan, idea for how their escape's gonna work. And then when the actual, let's push the button and make it happen happens, so much chaos and so many moving pieces, and a lot of the original thoughts and ideas are just dropped out of hat. People gotta book it kind of thing. So that's something where I was inspired by this movie originally for trying to like put pieces together for a prison escape thing for a D&D game. Yeah, fun.
And Steve McQueen in it, so I was really down. And then I found out it had Donald Pleasance in it.
Yeah.
And I was really down.
So, that's most about the filmmaking aspects and whatnot.
Also just amazing cast. Just wow.
Super stellar. Go and watch it. I really do think this is a movie that it is hard to explain how engaging it is all the way through.
It does not feel like 3 hours. This is easier to get through than like Nightbreed or Lamaget.
So much easier. Yeah. And if you want like, if you want an example of 3 hours wasted, I think Nightbreed's an excellent example. Like there's a lot of artistry and craft and stuff, but I do not care about any of the characters. I think with this movie, they forego plot pieces to emphasize the characters, and I think it succeeds because of that. Because one of the things that I think is a pretty solid like guideline for storytelling is there's usually a balance of, is this a character thing or is this a plot thing? And the plot of this movie is simple. They're trying to escape. But a lot of that character influence, emphasis, etc., like while the plot just kind of crawls along, because again, it's a hard process. It's a big goal.
Digging 300-foot tunnels.
Yeah.
By hand.
Yeah. They've got a lot to do with that. So how do you make it engaging and interesting? You emphasize the people involved. And I think that's what this movie succeeds at. And because it's 3 hours and because there's so many characters, you just have to experience it. That said, if you want to hear us talk about like the takeaways in the plot, without spoilers, go watch the movie now. We're getting into spoiler territory, and a 3 and a 2 and a da. Okay. So plot, I mean, good chunks of what I feel about the plot have been said. Simple, character focused. It's the best of the best reversed heist thing, or worst of the best, or worst of the worst.
Is it's like the plot will happen. It's just, will the characters be able to continue to keep their own sanity long enough to foresee that?
Yeah, that's a little bit of it. And then another thing with this is that the plot at its surface is escape. I mean, it's in the title, The Great Escape, and you have layers of breakouts happening where you have the big breakout. This is the multi-man operation. We're gonna set records with this one, boys, kind of thing. Alongside all of these smaller breakouts that are, I mean, we're not even 5 minutes into the movie and someone tries to pretend they're a Russian and wear a hat, wear a coat, and walk right out the door. like instantly you have a breakout. And you get moments where they're already sizing up, like, all right, this watchtower can't see this area, and
sight lines.
Yeah, and you have people playing with, like, all right, so the clay here is a little soft. We should be able to make our way out. All right, yeah.
But it's a little yellowish underneath, so it's a little hard to hide it.
Yeah, so
the topsoil doesn't look the same as the midsoil.
Yeah.
That's a real issue.
And then there's the real deep soil where it's just like pitch black. So you have layers of escapes between different characters trying to get out, and you do have a little bit of back and forth of people trying to keep it together for this massive operation. There's an
interesting part too where there's British officers speaking amongst each other, and they talk about how the duty of a prisoner of war, especially an officer, is to cause a stink, to make a big scene and to divert and draw as many eyes on them as they can, to just waste the efforts of manpower and just any little thing they can do.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Which is an interesting take on it.
Yeah. And so their conclusion is, how can we cause the biggest stink? We're going to make the biggest breakout. We're going to bust out 250 of these guys. And that's our goal.
Yeah. No more auxiliary tunnels. Nothing else. There's 3 tunnels. That's what we're doing.
Yep. So, while they start digging, you have some of these other characters. You have the American whose name starts with an H. I think it's Hiltz.
I'm not even going to pretend. I think Hiltz is right.
I think it's Hiltz. And then Hiltz has like a buddy up thing with a Scotsman named Ives, who the two of them try their own like sub escape because Ives is small and he's good at digging, and the American is the hot shot. He's out. He's ready to go. He's keeping it
brawler.
Yeah. He can handle himself very well. So between the two of them, they basically do a mole digging out scene where they're like, okay, so they're brought in with the British guys, and they're like, so you're telling me that your guys are trying to escape. That's the rumor. That's the word we've heard. And the American's like, yeah, we're going to dig our way out. How are you going to breathe? We're just going to poke a hole into the air. So, every X amount. So what are you going to do with the dirt? So he's going to dig it out in front of him, and I'm going to just push it behind me. And then it'll be our little pocket that we just poke along the way, and out we go. Cut to them escaping, for 2 seconds, and then brought in covered in dirt and clay, sent to the cooler, which is the solitary confinement.
A big issue they had is this prison camp actually had subterranean mics in it to detect digging, so it didn't go deep enough to get around those. Yeah,
so you can't simply just do surface stuff. So the way that they end up digging these tunnels is they have this whole operation of digging down, 30 feet?
Yep.
And then over 300 feet out to get far enough from the camp that they're in like the tree line. And what was kind of fun is further in the movie when one of their tunnels is discovered, they still have these other tunnels that they end up following through on. They kept surveying, and it's something where they think like, oh no, did we get the math wrong or something? I genuinely think I saw the some of the trees were cut down around it, so it pushed the goalpost further, and no one really acknowledged it or knew that that's what had happened. So then they have to like overcome this accidental obstacle that's just hopped in the way, which from like a D&D DM perspective is super fun, because you always want to like throw in I wouldn't even call it a plot twist, but like a
wrench in the gears.
Exactly. And it just makes it again
too swimmingly.
Yeah, it keeps it very engaging, even though they had such a unique and well thought out and well constructed plan. I mean, they went so far as to use boot polish to dye some of their outfits and uniforms so it looks more German.
Like a prisoner.
Yeah, and they went so far as to one of the guys, funnily enough, talking about bittersweet chocolate with almonds. One of the guys like pretends to give chocolate to an officer and ends up like stealing his wallet so that they can get all of his documentation so they could forge papers when they finally get out and are in wider Nazi Germany. I mean, it's a whole endeavor. They at one point they have the hotshot American Hiltz. He is recruited and they're like, hey, you can get out. Yeah? He's like, yeah, I can get out whenever I want. When you get out, could you write down a whole bunch of stuff? Because we don't know about like the lay of the land outside of this prison camp.
Yeah.
We need to know.
Escape for info.
Yeah. Where's the train? Where's the town? Where's the road? And he looks at them like they're insane. He's like, are you serious? I'm going to break out just so that I can get put back in here to give you this information. Y'all are nuts. If I escape, I'm getting out of here. Unfortunately, one of the tunnels gets discovered. Tom. They name all of the tunnels, just regular old human names, which is very fun. Harry. Yep. So, Tom gets discovered and
hidden under a stove.
And it was the furthest tunnel. This was the tomorrow. Yeah. We're breaking out. Gets busted right at the last second.
And they had like literally stopped working on the other two just to get Tom further because it was going so much better.
Yeah. And, when this tunnel's discovered, Ives, who has had it up to here, he snaps and he just makes a break for it. He crosses over the don't cross this wire. He starts climbing the barbed wire fence and he gets shot and killed, Hiltz's buddy. And literally like 10 minutes or 10 seconds later, it's, I'm on board, escapes the next night, cutting through the wire, through the blind spot between the guard posts, gets captured the next day. And they're like, oh my gosh, he got caught that quickly? And he's like, no. Or the British officer, Roger, is like, oh, he wasn't caught. He knew exactly what he was doing. This was intentional.
He got what he needed.
Going again by like the MCU comparison, it's something where if Roger is like the Nick Fury pulling all the cords, handling all the pieces of the entire operation thing, if we want to, we could call Hiltz as like the hotshot Tony Stark-ish of the movie. Ives is like the Phil Coulson. He's the one that galvanizes a lot of the rest of the group, but especially Hiltz. So very fun. And one, two, skip a few. Tom's discovered, Ives dies, they get their info. They start working on Dick and Henry as the two other tunnels. Eventually they manage to get it far enough out. They have to do a lot of clever architecture where they're taking boards from behind, like just
behind cupboards, beds, anything.
They're hiding dirt in the attic. I mean, all sorts of stuff. They end up coming up with this really smart dirt delivery mechanism. Yeah, where they hide it in like the sleeves of their pants.
The old Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, and they pull a string so that it'll drop some of the dirt. So if one of them's talking to another one that's gardening outside, which is a like totally legit allowed activity from the German
like they have like a theater, they're allowed a lot.
Yeah, they're allowed to sing, they have a choir. Yeah, it's something where it's not nearly as bad as say like Auschwitz. It's actually far, far more forgiving in that sense, which is kind of nice from a seeing prison camp movie, World War II stuff perspective, because I feel like a lot of it forgets that's like the Holocaust is not how prisoners of war were treated, at least in Nazi Germany. It was a lot rougher on the Pacific front, but yeah. So it's something where they're sneakily like smuggling dirt up into the gardens and dropping it out of their pants with this little like sock loosening mechanism that they tie strings to in their own pants. It's nuts. It's very fun. It's very clever. So, the night comes. They're gonna break out. And
this is a huge scale breakout. They want to get like 200 people out.
250. It was a lot of people. I mean, that's honestly, I don't know what the number of people was in the camp, but
like 2,000?
It's a ton. I mean, it's multitudes of those cabins themselves. And it's something where it's a whole event seeing people go from their cabin into the other cabin in the dead of night, avoiding the watchtowers. That by itself is its own hurdle that they got to overcome. Yeah. So, they start going down, and one of the guys that has been digging this tunnel has claustrophobia. He can't stand it. This guy from Poland is just like, I have been, like, for days at the time, I've been dealing with this dirt and shit.
And that's really a big thing, is just the mental toll these guys are undergoing, and then having to make this huge quest outside of this, like, you know, like, they're just because you get outside the wall, there's still a lot more to go.
Yeah, so he has to like get talked and hyped back into it. He would have been like one of the first to escape, but he can't get himself to do it because he succumbs to his claustrophobia for a moment. He has to like go get some air for a bit. Roger and Hiltz, they are the first with Mac, who's kind of like the informant guy at the prison camp. They're some of the first to make their way out. They see that the tree line is not obscuring of their actual tunnel.
They actually were getting out of.
Yeah. So they call for 30 feet of rope, and they have like a little signal thing so they can let the person know, hey, you're clear to escape. You're clear to escape. Like, there's only one guard going back and forth. The watchtowers are looking in, not out. So we can get through this, but we have to time it well. Eventually, one of the guys, air raids happen, so all of the lights go off, so that way the bombs don't end up taking out the camp. And one of the guys climbs up in the darkness and falls over, makes a loud noise. Guard goes to investigate, flashlight, almost gets away, and busted. The whole shebang gets in super trouble. Some of the guys are on their way out. I don't know, there's some like 10 or 20.
Yeah.
No, I say 10 or 20. There's 50 plus another like 10 or 20 that get brought back. I think it was like 70s. Yeah, I think it's 70s in total that got out, which is still impressive out of 250. And given that it's a like one at a time rope pull as they're on their way out to.
Slow burn process.
Yeah. So, some of these guys, they just outright book it. One of them has gone blind because of just his entire time at this compound.
Myopia.
Yeah, so his vision was going anyway. It finally happened. So he's being escorted out. The two of them have their own.
He wasn't even going to be let out initially. They were actually trying to stop him from being part of the escape
because he could ruin this whole operation. But one of his buddies sticks up for him. He's like, no.
I'll take care of it.
You're going with me. He who have eyes, so long as I have eyes. So they make their way out, and for their escape, they end up getting on the train, jumping off the train. They find a plane, like at an just at some random hangar and runway. They end up flying off. They crash land because they didn't have enough fuel. Yeah, they get hunted down, and one of them gets shot. The other one's brought in. Yep. For the other escapes, you have Hiltz. He goes on a just fucking massive motorcycle chase.
He's jumping over barbed wire fences, anything he can do.
Super cool. He ended up punching out one of the guards to disguise himself as one of the Germans to get out. You have Danny, the Polish guy with claustrophobia. It's him and Willie. They end up finding a lake with a boat, and they just start rowing.
And they rode their way all the way to Swiss border.
Oh, yeah. So they go, and they go, and they go, and they go, and they make it. And then, oh gosh, there's a whole bunch of other people. Roger and Mac get on a train, but they get caught when they're just about to exit. One of the guys tries to divert the enemy at that last moment because he sees
a bunch of German officers coming by.
Yeah, that would have recognized them. So he tries to cause a ruckus so they can get out. But even though they get out in that moment, they don't get far enough. They eventually get caught again. They almost make it, and Mac ends up falling for one of the old tricks in the book. And this is his own sub arc is him practicing German. And the guy opposite of him is like, hey, your German's getting quite good. He's like, thanks, man. I've been practicing a lot. He's like, dude, that's one of the oldest tricks in the book. So they're boarding onto a bus, and they're they're talking to each other in I think it's in French at that moment. I don't think it was German for that scene in particular. I don't recall. Anyway, they're talking in not English, and then the guy checks their passports and is just like, merci beaucoup. And he's like, merci beaucoup. The guy looks back and he goes, good luck. And he goes, thanks. Oh, and just immediately hightails chased out of there. Eventually they're caught by the Gestapo, and some folks make their way back to the prison camp. However, 50 of them end up put into a trailer. They're on their way to the camp, supposedly. Brought out into the middle of the field. All right, boys, you can, get out, stretch your legs. Do what you need to, blah, blah, blah. We have a long way to go. And
that's all that happens. They get back on the trail.
They're having this big back and forth talk about hey, I've never felt more alive, and then they get mowed down. The guy that was in charge of the prison facility as a whole has a good back and forth with the American, where he's like, well, I'm no longer in charge, so I guess you will see Berlin before I do. Because that was their interaction at the beginning of the movie. They end up announcing that 50 have been shot, and the British person that's meant to convey this information back ends up saying how many were wounded, and he won't elaborate more because they had all been killed. And it's the 20, there's, I think 20 that are returned to the camp and 5 that get out.
Yeah.
That sounds right.
3 get out.
Something like that. Yeah. It's definitely
2
Danny and Willie.
And the guy there's the one dude who steals a bike.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think those were the 3 that made it.
So the movie ends with a good chunk of folks back at this prison camp. It's very, cyclical, and they have this back and forth where they're like, so we caused a big stink, was it worth it? I don't know, it depends on your point of view. They leave it kind of up to the audience's interpretation of the events. Like, was it worth them going through all of this effort to try to break out and only some of them getting out versus a good chunk of them dying outright? Some even before they manage to get out, like Ives. I mean, he dies in the process of breaking out, just from the mental toll along the way. So the big takeaways, kind of going off with that question, the kind of philosophy of persistence against all odds. I think that is a massive piece of this movie, and whether or not it's worth it is up to the audience. I think that this movie's conclusion is yes, but it's not as black and white, because there is a lot that it takes for it to happen. Though some folks do get out, and
it's the real question of, it's like, do you value your life or your freedom? Yeah.
And I would say that this movie, again, it's epic storytelling. It has just enough time for all of these characters while managing what I would say is a very simplistic plot in the grand scope, and keeping it engaging and keeping it involved and immersive
and in rhythm.
Super well paced.
Nothing is dragging.
Yeah. And I think what's probably the most interesting thing with this movie is it's called The Great Escape. And it's kind of like a red herring in and of itself, in that the idea is all these guys are going to bust out, or we're going to see a prison break like no one has ever seen. And most don't escape. And the idea is put forth earlier in the film, and ultimately the conclusion of the film, that it's about causing a stink. Even if they don't necessarily get out, the fact that it was a great escape, like the effort in causing the enemy so much trouble, was the ultimate goal. The escape is just like a byproduct of that.
See, and I think that's just a take. Because I think that's the other question, is like, were they trying to escape? Because the British officer is what leads it.
Yeah.
The British officer has the conversation about, they're not trying to escape, they're trying to cause a stink. That's that other looming question.
Yeah. So,
but it's like they sent 200 people out, so were they really trying to escape? Because it's like 10 would have probably had a way better likelihood of actually escaping.
Yeah. And, I think, in that way, it's, again, my brain just keeps going, this is very MCU of them. Like Nick Fury-esque, where Nick Fury's whole shtick, as it were, he's there to, like, defend the world. And the way that he accomplishes this with the Avengers is galvanizing them with Coulson's death.
Yeah, like the trading cards trick.
Yeah, and it's something where it's like the goal of the individual prisoners might be escaping, but
what is the overarching committee that kind of started this? Yeah,
the people in charge are like, nah. What we're really trying to do is ruin the Nazis' days. And I think in that sense, it's kind of funny to see it be kind of this almost like shuffling of pawns. And is that something where the scale of this operation would have worked if that was like, clear from the get-go? There's a little bit of like ambiguous ethics involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
and much like our chocolate, she ends very bittersweet.
Yeah. So ultimately, watch the movie. It really is a fun watch. I think this is something that I would very happily rewatch again. I mean, it had been a couple of years. It was back in 2020 that I first watched this, and I remember liking it, but I was in it for a very particular...
You're taking notes, you know.
Yeah, I was more academically looking at it as, okay, storytelling, prison escape, okay, how do my players get out of a prison? Having watched this for the enjoyment of watching it as a movie and seeing how it portrays the story as a movie, it's so much fun. It really is. Like, genuinely, I may not feel well. I really did just want to talk about this movie, and so I'm pushing through so that I can talk about it. That's how highly I think of it. Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts?
Honestly, it's a really solid picture. I'm very interested to try to check out some more of this director stuff. It was John something, John Hughes, I think was his name. Either way.
Maybe.
But yeah, this is definitely cool. I also think it's fun. I will say also, this isn't a war movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
World War II is a backdrop of this movie and what kind of sets the setting up.
One of the things we were saying when kind of identifying this genre, while war is happening in the background, it's also kind of the background of like Sound of Music, which is a musical. This is reversed heisty, like based on a true story epic where the war happens to be the backdrop. It's almost like with Die Hard, how it's a Christmas movie. Christmas is happening in the background. Die Hard's its own thing.
Christmas.
Yeah. Set during Christmas, but it's doing its own thing. That was very exciting with this movie, because I expected there to be a lot more war stuff on the first view, and even going back and watching it again, I was like, I feel like there would be. And yeah.
Well, and that's one thing I really like is it's not really trying to hit that is the constant thing in war movies. Are they pro-war? Are they against war? Are they anti-war?
Yeah.
The whole thing. But like, this is more about like collective human spirit and.
Yeah. This is about, persistence. This is about pushing through against all odds. This is about the underdog sticking it to the guy in charge. And that's always, it's never not a good, fun vibe. Honestly. So, yeah, The Great Escape. It's a great movie.
Very much.
Great's in the title for a reason. So, aside from that, Connor, where can we check you out at?
As always, right here on Narrative and Nonsense primarily and mostly. You can go check out 5-String Connor if you want to see a random string of videos.
Yeah. If you want to see more of me, Narratives and Nonsense, we post just about weekly on Mondays for our podcast, and then you can also see me at Gillidan for the Win or at Gillidan. We have YouTube handles now that exists. This is a new thing. Whoa. So we're at Non and I'm at Gillidan. It's a whole new world of YouTube. I wonder who has that handle. I'm very interested because this was like just this last week that it happened. Yeah, if you want to see more of me, I do stream on occasion. We are doing a little bit of a break for this month in particular. Life's crazy as we approach the holidays between work and stuff and Thanksgiving and whatnot.
My D&D because people have family obligations.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. Anyway, I hope everybody has a fantastic rest of your week. Take care.